Hi, everyone, and welcome back to our annual broadcast of Fuel Arts, Art and Tech series. My name is Denis Belkevich. I'm the co-founder of Fuel Arts, and with me, our co-host, Sonia Stablbein, project manager at Fuel Arts. So today we have a long-awaited guest, and I'm happy that this guest agreed to join us. I see that we have a large number of audience watching us online. But traditionally, we'll start with some news regarding Fuel Arts. And we're happy to say that we have selected the shortlist for the upcoming Fuel Arts and Tezos Accelerator 2023, which is about to start in a week. So we have a tough task to define from 25 really perfect startups, the top 10, and we'll disclose the top 10, the startups enrolled in several days. So and at the same time, we're continuing working on our 2023 report on the investments in the art and tech startups industry. So today we sent to our subscribers, to the subscribers of our newsletter, the survey to both the startups and art strategists, our survey, and we're welcoming everyone who is watching us also to take part in it. Soon after the webinar finishes, you'll find the links to this survey on our social networks. So please help us to make this report better, because taking part in this survey means that you really do care about the future of the art tech ecosystem. And of course, Fuel Arts reports are inspired by the excellent work of our colleagues, and first of all, British company ArtTactic. For 22 years, this company has been delivering professional analytics of the various fields of the art market. So we are thrilled to announce our long-awaited today's guest, the founder and managing director of ArtTactic, Anders Petterson. Hi, Anders.
Hi.
Hi, Dennis. Hi, Sonia.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for accepting our invitation. Thank you for coming. I should confess that the list of the questions we're going to ask you today is the same list of the questions I've always tend to ask you throughout years. But meeting with you at mostly Deloitte Art and Finance Conference, so our communication was like, hello, Anders. Hi, Dennis. Great report. Thank you. So I won't take your time anymore because you need to present the report from the stage. Yeah, thank you, Dennis. So and now, thank you again for this opportunity to ask you a long-awaited list of the questions.
Well, thanks for inviting me. It's been follow your great works over the years, and it's, I think, fantastic to be able to talk to your audience. So shoot, go ahead.
Thank you. Your words of appreciation mean a lot to us. So a small introduction. I believe everyone knows you, though it's quite obligatory for our webinar. So Anders Petterson, the founder and managing director of ArtTactic, as I said, a London-based art market research and analytics company, which was set up in 2001. 22 years ago. So ArtTactic produces a number of global art market reports in collaboration with partners such as the Deloitte Art and Finance Report and Hiscox Online Art Trade Report. Also, Anders is regularly lecturing on the variety of art market topics for Sotheby's Institute of Art, London, Christie's Education, London, and ESA, Beirut. And I also know that you've been a founding board member of Professional Advisors to the International Art Market between 2011 and 2021. And this is not the full list of your CV. So let's start let's proceed with the questions. We're always curious of the background, what has led people to the art world. So having received your degree in management from London School of Economics and later working for JP Morgan. So when and how did you pivot to art in your career?
Well, I think like probably many of your audiences and people who's looking at the art world, I think many is increasingly coming from the business world and are looking for something else. And I think at my stage in the 90s, I guess I had a certain ambition within the traditional finance world to kind of learn and see as much as possible. But ultimately, I guess my desire was to work for myself, which I've been doing for the last 22 years. So I think part of it was driven by something else than the fact that the investment banking world. But the pivot to art, I think ArtTactic has really become a sort of a hybrid between my interest in financial markets, my interest for data quite early on, which was further kind of, I would say, enhanced during the time working in the financial industry, seeing what transparency and data can do to markets in terms of building markets. Personally, I had an interest in contemporary art, young contemporary artists from time studying at LSE in the early 90s, kind of following a little bit the growth of the YBA during that time, which was quite exciting to see how the whole art scene in the UK transforming through this kind of movement. So, and then when I left, I guess I didn't really have a properly clear idea what I was going to do. I knew I was kind of do something for myself, but and then bit by bit, I think within a sort of 6-month time, I realized, okay, why don't I focus on what interests me? So interest is data, and why don't I take it on more of a passion side, which is the art. And the combination of those two, I guess, is really what the foundation for ArtTactic today is. From a personal point of view, it combines my sort of more the interest in understanding any market. It doesn't really matter if it's art or anything else. Obviously, in this case, I'm combining two interests, as I said, the art market, but really to try to use data to get insights. I mean, I was an outsider myself, and I know sort of really how difficult it is to navigate and understand and feel confident in this market. And I felt that maybe we can contribute something to this space. Maybe there's something that we actually can give people to give them a tool of many that might help them along this journey. So that's, I think, that was the starting point. So it feels like it was a massive sort of jump from, finance to art. But I think we see in our industry now, there's more and more people jumping this way, whether you're going from law to then, practicing art law, whether you're from, traditional insurance to art insurance. I think, the art market has become big enough now to really exemplify an industry rather than just a sort of a cottage business, which I think, attracts more and more, professionals from different backgrounds, different both professional experience and so forth. I think maybe less common in the time when I did it, but I think the motivations are still the same. So that's a little bit of myself from that time.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'd also love to know the story of ArtTactics, because as Dennis just mentioned, you founded the company 22 years ago, so in 2001. Could you tell us more about art market back then, how it was, and also what kind of challenges did you face through, all these years?
Well, I think the challenges are quite a lot. We probably won't spend the entire session on talking about that bit. But I think, obviously when I started, so there was a lot of things happening at the same time, which is maybe not dissimilar to what we've seen in the last 2 or 3 years with regards to this whole digital asset space, NFTs, etc. I mean, I was sort of early 2000, late 1990s was the typical internet boom, lots of startups, lots of excitement in London in particular. And it was just that sort of position when I left the banking side, I kind of entered into this scene, which was very much a startup scene, and I found that quite exciting. And I at that point I realized I was probably not going to set up a tech startup, but I felt that there was something happening at that time which was exciting. It was also the time where both ArtNet and ArtPrice were listing their companies on stock exchanges, and I felt here's something, even information is becoming potentially quite important at the moment. So that was, I would say, the sort of initial seed for me to start to think, okay, maybe there is something here. I think the challenges generally when it comes to the art market for any business, but particularly for information-led business, is that at the time when we launched this in the early 2000s, the market was much smaller. It was driven predominantly by very knowledgeable group of insiders that really didn't need information. I mean, they there was nothing that we could offer them that was of any potential sort of interest or could enhance their knowledge in any way. They probably had 10 times as much information than we had. Which meant that obviously the starting point was quite difficult. Who are our audiences? Who are our clients? We thought we were going to appeal to the existing collector base or people that operates, but realized quite quickly that group is just not big enough. We, at the same time, I think we realized that there, like you yourself have been doing now since you started, is this combination of information, education, and that's really a sort of core to everything we do. Dennis mentioned we're doing things outside our ArtTactic umbrella. I'm working for university institutions, teaching students for now since how many years has it gone? I mean, every time I say this thing, it's probably 18 years now when we've been teaching on different programs, and it's been absolutely crucial in terms of, I think, educating the next generation of art business people. It's been incredibly important for us to be able to help our audience understand what our research is for, and so all these kind of processes, which has obviously kind of followed what the art market, the fact that we started up in the early part of the art market trend was just probably a coincidence. Had I been born either 5 years later or 5 years before, I probably would have started 5 years later or 5 years before. So that was kind of just more of a coincidence that we were at that sort of cusp of the millennium, and then following the market from that point. But as the market grew, and particularly up to 2005, 2006, 2008. We started to see interest in the business and in terms of information, but it still was a tough space to be in. Tough to monetize information, tough to sell information, and it really needed the financial crisis in 2009 to kind of instill some kind of sense that maybe it's worth actually listening, to have a second opinion or have information from other other sources, and that, I would say, is probably the first cycle was almost 8-9 years of trying to convince people that it's worth something, and then starting to see a second cycle on the back of a crisis situation, which I think led people to just be a bit more careful, maybe using due diligence tools, information as a way of navigating quite a complex market space.
Right, thank you.
Thank you, Anders. Nowadays, ArtTactic is an established business with its established revenue streams. But as you've mentioned, in the beginning of 2000s, it was a pure startup because the idea was innovative and you found your market niche and the demand for that. So my question is, how was the business model of ArtTactic transformed throughout the years? Because you have created powerful partnerships, for instance, with leading brands, including Deloitte, Hiscox, and TEFAF. What other partnerships or milestones would you highlight?
So I think in terms of the business model, I don't think it has changed enormously over the time. I think the core of the business model was that we were going to make money out of purely selling information. We didn't want to get involved in any kind of commission-driven business. We didn't want to be that our transactions or our research was linked to the value of what we looked at. We made it kind of really difficult for ourselves. I think in most cases, particularly in the art world, commissions are a very common structure of compensation. We felt at that time that would potentially create conflict of interest down the line, and the trust in what we're doing would be jeopardized by having financial interest in what we're doing. And I think it was probably a bit naive the way we were thinking about that, but I think I'm kind of now glad that we took that approach. I think the reason why we've been able to work with established institutions like Deloitte and other, being a small entity, is I think we stayed quite true to what we were doing. We were only about information. We're not about anything else. So in a sense, the business model has stayed the same. I think it's just that when you stick long enough to something and people realize, okay, actually there maybe is something here. There maybe is worth, maybe there is some kind of trust in these guys. So let's work with them. And I think that's sort of, in a sense, is, one of the few, I guess, the currency we have in the art market, beside the kind of the hard financial currency, is trust. And I think without trust, we don't have much at all. And we spent a good 23 years on building trust, building relationships, which we feel is incredibly important, particularly when you produce information, because people could easily say, what is this? What's the worth of this information? You're doing it for a certain purpose. And I think that is a little bit the problem with information in the art market, is that it's often used for a purpose. It's used to sell something, or it's created for the purpose of achieving a certain goal, rather than for the purpose of just being information that will inform and educate. Therefore, I'm sort of really glad to see, more and more people coming into the space, producing different research on different topics, like yourself and others. And so I think this, rather than seeing, people saying, you're afraid of competition. Actually, I welcome competition, because that's the only way people will start to see that there's actually a market here. We need more people interested in. The more we can, more things we can produce, and there are millions of topics that I can come up with that we could just sort of all write about, that would make and inform people more. So I think, the space is tiny and should become bigger, and I'm glad that more people are moving into space. But for us, I would say the only thing that has evolved is the currency of trust. That's where maybe we have, in certain types of, during the pandemic, we maybe had to shift our business model slightly away from bigger projects to more online, to more education. We did a lot of online courses that gave us a new platform to cultivate and get more people interested in what we're doing. So that helped us later on. We have kept these models. So we're nimble, we're small, we're self-funded, so which means that we don't really have the external pressure from investors in terms of growing quickly. And I think that, in a sense, is probably not always the best route, particularly if you're trying to grow a business. But in a business where you're trying to inform and educate people while you're trying to create value, and we realized, had we had backing, probably we would have gone within the first 4 or 5 years of the business. And luckily, we sort of set ourselves up to have a long runway, and come to the point where people are rewarding us through actually paying for the services that we offer. And I think that's, we feel it being a very privileged situation to be in this position right now, and having the opportunity to look at so many different areas and explore new territories, intersections between different parts of, finance, art, technology, art, consumer art, philanthropy art, and so forth. So that's where we are.
Thank you, Anders. A genius phrase. I even noted it: the currency of trust. Please let me use it in our report as well, but with your copyright.
Yeah, I also absolutely love this phrase. I'm for sure going to remember this one. I also want to ask you more about the services that ArtTactic provides. So I was going through a website, just doing my research, and I was curious to know more about Forecaster. Could you tell us more, like, how did you create the service and who is using the service in general?
So the Forecaster actually is it's an educational tool. It started. I have to kind of think now. It's probably back in 2014, 15, during a summer course that I was running at Sotheby's Institute here in London. The course was really about understanding value, understanding what drives value, and we linked it basically to auctions. I think the students in the 2 first hours of that session was pretty excited, and then as the course kind of ran on and we started to move into other things, they kind of forgot a little bit the kind of the excitement that was hopefully kind of generated in the first session. We decided at that point, let's do kind of a competition, which was basically trying to get people, okay, let's put this into practice. Put your tools into the practice, use analytics to try to foresee or forecast what's actually going to happen in an upcoming auction, and use your not only data but use your art historic knowledge or whatever you can bring to try to give some sense of price forecasting. So it started in a manual sense, and I realized it was very difficult to manage that, time consuming to manage that on a, on the back of an envelope or in a spreadsheet. So we decided the following year that let's put this into a kind of a platform, and that was Art Forecaster. So the focus on Art Forecaster was initially to gamify the kind of educational environment by getting people to be better at something. The more we started to do this, we have realized that there are a group of 100, 150 people that are just religiously playing this. They've been doing it for 6-7 years. Some has been doing 30 to 35,000 forecasts, and they're getting good at it. And you realize actually part of the other tool I realize is not simply for education, but it's also a professional, well, what can I say, like a professional development tool. And in a sense, very few people are able to be in the position of seeing a lot of artworks coming to auction and then put a sense of value on it. What do you think is going to happen? And obviously, this is what specialists in the auction house are doing all the time. But most of us, never have that chance. So part of the Art Forecaster was really to try to kind of embed this the same option, and actually start to have saying, well, maybe everyone can become good at what they're doing. Maybe the actual the element of being a good forecaster is not so much about the art historical knowledge, but it's about feeling of the market, understanding what drives the market. From smaller things like what sequence is the lot in the particular auction to who is this young artist, what has happened in the past, learning about comparables, but also starting to apply your own aesthetic judgment of, is this a good piece of art? So in a sense, the game became a way for us to embed all the kind of different tools in a kind of simulated but still real context, because these are real auctions. These are upcoming sales at Philips the following day. These are not simulated that you can find the answers. So it was the kind of excitement, I think, of both. Now, what we've done since then, because we've been running for so many years, is that we're using this as a talent scouting tool now. We know who are good, and we're using these as part of our network of people that informs us. We realize that a lot of these people are actually, very entrenched in the art market itself, and they're doing this for fun. They're doing it for a bit of a competitive adrenaline, reasons, and for us, it's actually extended our network, and we can specifically use this platform also to identify people that are very good at certain things. For example, so if you're looking at, pop artists or specifically Warhol, again, we can identify people within the system that has been playing this for a while and have certain skill sets. So we see this as I said, educational tool, but hopefully that these skills that is being developed can actually be used for professional purposes. And in this case, we're using it for ourselves, and meaning that we are harvesting the knowledge from these people that they have and embedding these into the reports. I mean, then as you mentioned, the survey you having now, we do very similar things in our business. And that, is a crowdsourcing and way of gathering information. And we do that sometimes with smaller panels of experts and sometimes larger audiences. So this is really feeding into that particular, that particular model. So it's not about betting. It's not about making money. It's actually almost like an anti-betting, I would say, a platform. It's really about trying to, just people have a bit of fun, and hopefully that, as the competitive aspect of it, takes over a little bit, and you really want to win. There are rankings, there are competitions, there are, and there's also an opportunity for people who play a lot to exchange what we call kind of player currency, or your player point into actual research. So people can, instead of paying for our subscriptions or reports, they can play a lot, and then they can actually exchange that money to get free reports, or reports in exchange for these points. So therefore, students and everyone else is more than welcome to play, and anyone who's on this, watching this, it's artforecaster.com. Please join. We need more competitors. So that's a little bit of background for Art Forecaster.
Thank you. I also would like to personally say that I absolutely love the podcast that ArtTactic runs, and I would just love to say that to you, and also would love to ask you, how did you decide to actually make a podcast, and who were the first guests?
So this is all thanks to Adam Green, who is the podcast host, and Adam was a student of mine at Sotheby Institute. I think we're going back, well, 2009, 2010, maybe. Adam, sorry if I'm got you wrong and you're watching this, but quite a while ago. But Adam came to me with an idea of, podcast. Why don't we do a podcast? And that's a little bit like, I think sometimes, ArtTactic I feel a lot of the project that has kind of been originated within ArtTactic are actually small ideas that we have incubated, used it as a platform, not in a kind of very commercial sense, but this was an idea from a student. We took it on, and Adam has done an incredible job over these years in terms of building the podcast audiences. But also, I think, we tapped into something. We were one of the early ones when it came to actually art market podcast and art business podcast. I think the stream of interest that we have in people that want to come onto the podcast, I think is sort of just a testimony to that. Actually, that form and that model means something, and that actually the content is of value to the other clients. So I can't remember really what the first guest was, and Adam probably will have to bring Adam on to one of these a session in the future, but Adam, as I said, was he's really took it initially, I think, from sports podcasting and said, these guys are doing something. Why shouldn't we do something for the art? And he ran with it, and he built it up, and it's really become, as I said, a very important part of it. But that's an example again, kind of a student with an idea, and we're building it within our platform. And that's, as I said, a lot of the projects, Old Masters, for example, which was a segment of the market that we didn't cover for many years. Again, was initiated by a student, and Megan, who was responsible for this, was coming from her dissertation, and then we basically saying, well, why don't you do something for us, and work with us if you want to kind of cultivate this interest further. So I think this is a little bit, and I feel what we can do sometimes is that we might not be big, but we have a platform and that we can actually disseminate information, and we find people that has good passion for information and data and knowledge of a certain area. If we can act as a way of a conduit to kind of kickstart that journey, I think that's a nice position, and that's something we would love to do. So anyone with great ideas out there, please, a little bit like you guys, you looking for fantastic business ideas. Sometimes we actually looking for research ideas. We're looking for new areas that hasn't been covered yet. Come to us and we will discuss it and see if we can sort of put some resources or help into it.
Sounds very inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you, Anders, and thank you again, and Adam as well, for inviting us. I mean, Fuel Arts, me in particular, to speak at your ArtTactic podcast. It was a year ago, but I still remember the level of publicity which we received after that event. So thanks again. And also, I should admit, we are still waiting for the second part of the Old Masters series announced.
Yeah. Okay.
So we are your devoted subscribers to almost all of the services. Please let me get back and make a small additional questions towards art betting, because we also, investigating the market from time to time, we see some startups with the idea to master the art betting business model, but most of them unfortunately do not find the market fit. We have our own opinion why it happens, but I'd like to ask you, what prevents arts betting from becoming an international trend like sports betting?
Well, I think I'm not. Well, I think that there's several things. I think the sports betting. The audience for sports betting is massive. We thinking about football or thinking about anything, NHL or thinking about NBA, or we're talking audiences that are, it's not incomparable in size with what we talk about the art market. So I think the art market, we have to just kind of, even if we operate within this world, I think we have to just realize it's a very small market. It's a relatively, it's got a, on an enthusiastic level, there is a lot of people enthusiastically interested in art. I think when you move from enthusiasm for art to actually bet on art, it's a massive, massive step. This is when you're putting money in to try to, predict some kind of outcome which is going to give you money. You got to have knowledge, and I just don't think the people who has knowledge are that interested in it. It's they have so many other ways of using that knowledge in a more maybe kind of concrete way of actually buying the art and get some interest out of it. I just think there's I just don't think the audience is there for, and then for those people who say, well, I'm interested in anything that I can bet on. I do art now. I mean, you're gonna have trouble. I don't think you actually, it's tough. Art and betting is tough. Art, depending also what are you betting on? Are you betting on outcomes of auctions? Are you betting on the event?
Auction results.
Auction results. I mean, it can also be very exposed to manipulation. That's if there's suddenly a massive market around betting on art, and who stops that from people in that market to then influence the outcome of the auction? I mean, that's already kind of potentially happening, not for betting reasons. But so I just don't think these two products really fit. And I think the question we need to ask ourselves, what purpose does it serve? Is the betting actually creating any value besides just purely kind of more speculation? I think if that's the answer, that is speculative, then I just don't think it has a purpose in this market. I think if it was something that prediction, like a predictive market or prediction market, could be used as data for the purposes of valuation or something, and then I think maybe we can start to think about that actually this has a value. But if it becomes, I think in general, obviously we work on the market and we see the commercial aspect of it, but I think immediately we're starting to move the pendulum too far to more the kind of opportunistic, short-term speculative, and I just don't think it's necessarily that healthy for the market as a whole. So anything we can draw back into, is it actually building something for the market? Is it doing any good to the market? Yeah, let's look at it. Let's do something with it. If it's just short-term benefits for a few, I'm not sure if it's actually worth even looking at it. That's personal opinion.
Yeah, thank you. We totally agree with your personal opinion. So let's get back to your educational practice. You hold the position of a course leader at the Art Finance Innovation Program at Sotheby's Institute of Art. So as we know, a few years ago, Sotheby's eliminated the art market and art finance programs and merged them into one program called the Art Business. In your opinion, does that mean that the art market doesn't need a high number of art economists, but rather a small number of qualified ones?
Yeah, I don't think the art market needs a lot of art economists. I think that's probably right. I think what the art market needs, I guess I'm not sure exactly where these. I guess the Sotheby's New York maybe, because not Sotheby's London I don't think had an independent program, was always. Art business. So I can't really speak for why that happened. But in terms of does the art market needs art economists? No, I don't think that at the moment. I don't think the market is big enough to kind of accommodate for that. Again, not sure what kind of value they will add to the markets. We can need a few, but I just don't. Again, I think the economist as a sort of way of trying to understand how markets work. I think there's a lot of knowledge that sits in academia, which I feel it's not getting out there. It really sits and it gets stuck in the academia. It's journals, fantastic articles, fantastic research being written, but it's written for the academics. It's written for that environment and never really finds the sort of daylight. I would love to make sure that somehow this is actually shared with the larger public and the various stakeholders in the art market. So I think there's a role. I think the economists are already there, but they're not sort of art economists, meaning that they're typically economists with an interest in art. And I feel that material, if you were trying to be sort of living off becoming an art economist solely, I don't think you will have a good living. I think that's going to be limited in opportunities. But as I said, they are already there, and I feel that the real opportunity is to try to sort of to get that information in the hands of the public. I know obviously sometimes these journals are very academically quite technical, but if even to get summaries out of this, some of these findings into the public domain, I think would be hugely important. So coming back to your point regarding art and sort of finance aspect, this is a sub-segment, a very small sub-segment of the market as a whole. It's growing. It's growing because a bit like the field that you're in, which is looking at, I guess, funding, incubation, education, information in the sort of accelerator space. So there's a sort of an art business side in terms of thinking about the business of running art businesses. There's also an art business side in terms of running an art business more from a kind of, how do you operate a gallery? How do you operate an art advisory, etc. And I think all those skills are really, really important. So I think the art business as a field of study, which is a combination of traditional art business subjects and the art, I think is really a good one. I mean, it really attracts people that comes from either the art world and need the business skills, or from the business side that need some appreciation and learning and confidence in sort of looking and appreciating art. So I think there's a real role, and obviously, as you mentioned earlier on, coming from a different background, I think I probably could save myself a couple of years of fumbling around trying to figure out what role I should play if I had taken one of these courses. I think it helps you focus and navigate very quickly about, what role should I play in this market. But coming back to the art finance side, I think that is still a niche market, and I think it will remain a niche market. But it's a sort of a sub-segment of the art business side. I think again, we've been working with art, on art and finance with Deloitte now since 2009. That we also observing that the market is growing more and more interest in, art as an asset class and all the kind of related issues with art and wealth management. So it's not growing at the, fantastic speed, but bit by bit each year, I think there is an adoption of an understanding that, art is more than just purely a collectible. It has value, it has financial value that needs to be taken care of. How do we do that? And that sort of starts to open up a whole set of interesting, discussions and conversations and tools and products, etc.
Thank
I
you.
also want to ask, like what you just exactly said, that does it mean that the economic crisis, like each economic crisis, put more attention towards art, and they kind of need more research for that? Do you mean this?
Yeah, I think every time, if everything looks too easy and everything looks like one directional, the way we have seen always is that people are less interested in information, because it's almost like kind of anything you touch turns into, something of more value than it initially was. I think generally, when things are getting slightly more complicated and maybe more complex, that's the time where information starts to become important. So I think for us, is every sort of downturn is a sort of a sense of sort of almost like hit the reset button. What do we want to do? The way that we see research sometimes comes from a business perspective, where businesses are, starting to look into what they've done in the past. Do you need to continue in the same direction? Should we do something else? And research might be a way of informing that direction. From a collector's point of view, they might, again, reset and say, I was on a certain wave for the last 2, 3, 4 years. This has made me think, what should I do in the future? And therefore, again, information and research becomes. So I think these downturns just gives us a sense of time for a bit of space of thinking about the next. And in that space of thinking, that's where I think information becomes more valuable. If it's everything, as I said, is one directional, and there's a lot of rush towards something, information suddenly becomes a sort of added burden. Why do we need to do this? No, we don't need to, because look at what's happened over the last 2 years, probably going to continue. So people become lazy in terms of, I would say, looking maybe in things in more details.
Thank you. Also, Dennis and I had a conversation about May Moses Index, and would love to know your perspective, because as I understand, first when it was created by 2 professors, it was public and was available to everyone. And then when it was acquired by Sotheby, it was not longer the case. Do you think this kind of indices need to be public, and the information they provide should be public and available to everyone?
Well, I think, obviously Sotheby's decision to do that, it's their decision. I think from a kind of public good perspective, I just don't think it was a loss. I think it was a loss for the market. I think May Moses had a reputation, as you say, coming from 2 academics. It was produced for the purposes of, something solid, using a methodology of repeat sales, which, most people can agree on is, at least a methodology that compares, apples with apples and pears with pears, rather than the other way around. And I think, in a sense, to remove that from the market, it best means like we have one less tool to work with. So I think there's room for something similar to come back in again and to take that position. Indices are, is not an sort of be all end all that's going to solve everything. I just think that it's useful to have a recognized trust. Again, comes back again what we talked about earlier, a trusted index that somehow people can use as a benchmark. I think we need to be sort of maybe a bit cautious of using these indices as kind of action tools, like saying, the market is up 30%, so let's go out and buy some art. I think there's a massive step from what you see in these indices and actually going out there and do it in person. So I think that's a big thing. But still, I think any data that has been existed in the public domain that will be retracted and taken off the public domain is a loss for the market itself, for people who uses it. So I would welcome anyone coming into that space and trying to create something similar or sharing that information with the public. I think transparency in general is the only way to build a market. Yes, it might mean lower margins for certain parts of the market, but I think that will be compensated by the fact that you're just more people involved. But unfortunately, I think we're still in that slightly, mental state of, less transparency actually means that we can just get a slightly higher margins, and that works for a few. And unfortunately, that's not a great building block to build a bigger market, get new audiences in, looking for younger people, etc. This is not the kind of way you in today's world, particularly, build a marketplace. So hopefully, I would say the more public information we can have, or more accessible information, at least, that the better.
Thank you, Anders. And please let me ask you one more question regarding the brick and mortar reports before we move to NFT and Web3. So you've mentioned earlier that the more reports, the better. And as we know, at least 5-6 years ago, there were two reports on the market, two global reports trying to assemble to estimate both private and public markets. I mean, the TIFAF report and the Art Basel and UBS report. So since Claire McAndrew left TIFAF to join Art Basel, TIFAF tried to proceed with that and create the report with several other persons, but ended up abandoning the idea of a global report and created only niche reports. So nowadays we have only one global report, the Art Basel and UBS report, which is called the art market. And all the market and all the collectors, all the art market players just have one particular data. They do not have to look at two reports, which had, let's say, 10-15% difference, even several years ago. So my question is, do you believe it's beneficial for the market to have only one global report everyone could be oriented at?
Yeah, well, I think Claire has been doing a fantastic job with the Global Art Market Report over so many years. There's an enormous amount of effort and data and time that goes into that report. So I think, on one hand, I just don't think it necessarily needs another. I mean, you can always argue from the point of view, if we had two numbers, then, at least we could sort of say maybe the market is somewhere in between. We know that it's very hard to assess the market in general. We've been in this industry trying to also assess things, and it's based on estimates, it's based on smaller samples that you're trying to, scale up to kind of give a sort of sense of what the market is about. It's also a very difficult market to harvest information because people don't necessarily always tell the truth and so forth, because it's the perception of the market is obviously a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, and if everyone thinks it's great, then everything will be great, and that. So I know the challenge. I don't think so. I think Claire and what that report has plays an enormously important role, and I just not necessarily think that anything that's going to come, an additional one will add much. If anything, it might add confusion and uncertainty to already a data that people are already mistrusting art data in general. I think there is just sort of a general suspicion that anyone who produces art data, there's something kind of going on there that's not quite right. Now, that might not necessarily that the data is wrong, but they feel that the data that's being fed in might be manipulated. It's part of a story that we don't understand. So there's there's so much non-transparency in the market that often discredits the information that we produce. I think if you launched another report, and then it might just create confusion, and maybe you need 10 reports in order for to start to maybe creating a population of, and then you can start to take some averages and medians, etc., to maybe sort of saying, well, here is the market. It's come from this to this. So I think the better thing is that people produce smaller things. I think there are, the global report gives an incredible overview of many aspects of the global market, but within that there are again hundreds of sub-markets which can be explored in further details. And I think that's where we should spend our time. I think we have use that as a sort of a starting point, and okay, of course everyone can sort of saying, oh, is that the real data? It doesn't really matter that much whether it's 67 billion or 65 billion or 50 billion. Is it going to make a huge difference? Probably not. So I feel that report serves a fantastic function, and I just don't think it's going to be any particular value of adding anything more to that space. But then there are, as I said, thousands of other spaces that can be done, all the way down on the object level, all the way down to the movement, segment, category, where people can actually really benefit from information in terms of educating themselves. So I see this as almost like a kind of a funnel where the big report captures your attention, and then you're starting to move downwards where you need more and more information. So you might see something in the report that says Africa is exciting, and then you said, okay, well, let's educate myself about the African art market, and you need to go beyond that report to do that. And there other people comes in, ourselves and others out there are producing, journalists writing articles, and bit by bit you using that as a sort of I would say as a filter mechanism to home in on certain aspects. So I think that report does that incredibly well. And then I think it's up to all of the rest of us to try to maybe pick up some of these things and take the journey, or lead the audiences on a journey deeper into the market. So so I think the way things are now it's probably not a bad thing. I think just as I said to you earlier, Dennis and Sonia, is that I think the more of us who can produce things, so the report that you're producing or something that wasn't there before, that gives insights, that gives interest, and there are so many of these areas that are kind of open for grabs and that people can do something with. So, but you got to get someone, you got to have actually someone to do it. I think that's obviously these things takes time. There's going to be also a willingness of and for people to pay for this, or someone needs to pay for it. Otherwise, you can't do it for free. So that is, one of the challenges that I think most people in the information space has, is how do we ultimately monetize this if that's what we only live off. So
thank you.
Thank you. Also, as you just said, that's like covering specific niche and specific topic. Would love to ask you about the NFT report that you have been releasing since 2021. Could you tell us, when did you actually make the decision that this is worth, paying attention to and making a specific report? And could you tell us more about the report in general?
So this I think the NFT report was a response again to a phenomenon that we started to see kind of late 2020, where we were, I think it was kind of the autumn of 2020, where we're sort of starting to hear a little bit about what was happening with the NFTs. We're not from a sort of a tech world, so we were sort of kind of, okay, well, let's look at this, let's see what it is. And it was really, again, and we didn't come from, I would say, the kind of native crypto world. We came from the art point of view and starting to think, okay, what does this mean for the art world? What could this technology, in a sense, because we've been looking at blockchain for the last 5-6 years in terms of the art on blockchain, and there was always, creating registrars, creating provenance tracking tools, a way of kind of dealing with many of the issues that the art market has in terms of tracking provenance, in terms of proving authenticity or whatever it was, and how do we store information in general about artworks without having to constantly replicate this process again and again and again and again. So we thought, okay, this, and that discussion has gone for a while. Now the NFT for us was almost kind of, is this technology kind of a shoehorn, a way of getting, general art world to take an interest in this, because I think generally when people talked about blockchain, people were relatively uninterested in the early stages. And then NFT came along, and there seemed to be a certain energy even in the early stages, but obviously during 2021, this starting to take a whole different shape and form. We thought, okay, this is really interesting. People are noticing. Media obviously took over. And that at that point we thought, okay, well, what is our role in this space? We will not replicate many of the excellent sort of analytic tools out there and platforms that set up, because we have no chance of it. They are, light years ahead of us in terms of understanding this space. We thought, okay, we need to still think about where do we belong. We belong in the traditional art world, but we are obviously acting as a kind of a information bridge between the traditional art world and maybe what's happening out there. So that was the kind of initial thought about the NFT market, was to really try to inform our audiences about what was happening out there. And then that was kind of a process that we are continuing to do. Obviously, because the market is changing so rapidly and so quickly, by the time we publish something, things seems to be outdated. So we realized actually we can't be in that space. This is go too fast. We can't be sort of, a quarterly report, because the time we actually reported something, it's already gone. The market is somewhere else. So we are taking a more, I would say, sort of a stakeholder approach to this research, in terms of actually listening to people and getting opinions for what other people in the market think about the space. But rather than kind of looking at this from a short-term perspective, it's kind of where is this technology going to take us in the future, and to what extent is, as I said, I think the NFT market in a sense has acted, or this boom that we had has created an awareness of the technology itself that I think ultimately can be beneficial for the art market down the line. And I think, it's going to take some time for that to happen, but I generally believe that the discussions that we had around blockchain 6-7 years ago was kind of going, not anywhere. I think NFTs in a sense kind of allowed the art market to focus that, okay, this is what it means. So this is what blockchain can do. Okay, well, this is interesting. And they're starting to talk about digital art and the way we could kind of secure ownership, and also the kind of the equities regarding ensuring that the fair share of, hopefully will go back to the creator, etc. I know these things not always happen, but at least the ethos behind this was something that I felt like actually this is something that the art world can really, really need, and maybe this is the technology that will allow this to happen. So that was kind of, I would say, our motivations for doing the research, and still will continue to be the kind of the reason for doing this. We're not trying to kind of replicate what other people are doing, that will do that much better than us when it comes to tracking, what's actually happening on the transactions, etc. We can't keep up with that, but we can stick back a little bit. And I think sometimes it's actually quite good to be slow in research, because it allows you to step back and ask questions. Is this really going the right direction? And for what purpose are we doing this? And I think sometimes you get so caught up in the kind of bubble of, this is fantastic, it's going to change things. And we're starting to forget maybe that we're sitting a little bit in an echo chamber, talking to each other, and no one has any kind of negative comments about, should we maybe do something else? So I think in that sense, our research, I do believe, hopefully, that it, adds something to the existing space.
Yeah, it was really helpful. And starting from the first edition of your NFT report, you pointed out the top gaps and hazards of, probable gaps and hazards. Almost all of them came into life after that. So that was really like a roadmap. So I would recommend everyone to go to the ArtTactic website and purchase it. So Anders, I'd like you to comment on one of the most interesting peculiarities of NFTs, in my opinion. So previously, I said that the art market, consists of the traditional part, let's say the public art market, the auction sales, and the private market.
Yeah.
So in terms of NFTs, it's all public, because the one of the strongest advantages of NFT works is their 100% sales transparency, because they are traded on digital marketplaces. So do you think this to be a very strong advantage for, let's say, the further development of the market? I mean, it's transparency.
Yeah, I think what we come back to a little bit the point earlier on. I think transparency is absolutely crucial to build any market. Of course, a non-transparent market can work for a few people, and they can have fun and make money out of it, and particularly make money out of people who are less knowledgeable about it. But I think generally any model that allows for transparency, price transparency, sales transparency, I think it's ultimately, will attract bigger audiences. It just makes a kind of a level playing ground where we're all starting from the same thing. We have the access to this, at least the sort of what we think is the right information. I think, the fact that we have that doesn't mean that the market will operate in a necessarily an orderly fashion and will be ethically and morally working in the right way. I think, what we've seen is that obviously transparency and openness of data also makes it it's slightly a self-fulfilling aspect to it as well, which means that people are using the data to track things and to kind of these things. That obviously opens up for people to manipulate these, and we're seeing wash trading and all those things. So I think transparency itself definitely is a good thing in terms of getting more people involved. I think transparency and building these things comes with a obligation and a responsibility that if you leave that in the hands of people with vested interest, and might not always turn out that great. So I think a lot of these things needs some kind of structure and rule book, which ultimately makes people play with the right things, because otherwise you can have as much transparency and as much thing as possible. But if people again come back to this notion of trust, if we don't trust what's coming out there because we don't believe these transactions are real, even if we can see them and we can look at them, then are we almost like we're a little bit back to where we started. So I think the technology, and I would love to have obviously a place where both primary sales and secondary sales was logged in the art market, where we could see, gallery sales, and we could see auction sales, and any of the sales will be logged somewhere. I think, that and I don't think actually, even if obviously people are afraid of that happening because it becomes too open and, it leaves very little room for sort of transactions and negotiation. Ultimately, I think that will increase the level of trust and potentially make the market bigger and more interesting and more people involved. So, but transparency in itself is not necessarily kind of a, the thing that will make everything, solve everything. I think, as I said, it can also be used as a weapon to create illusions of something that isn't the case. So we got to be a bit careful. We're going to kind of combine transparency with some kind of regulation, which might not be government regulation, but at least some kind of trusted, as I said, rule book for how we operate this. And then hopefully that will allow the market to kind of grow in a healthy and healthy way.
Thank you, Anders. As we're running out of time, but we'll be too much obliged to you if you spend with us several more minutes, because we have 2 more questions to ask you about.
Sure.
Absolutely. So I would love to ask you a question about Web3, because lots of different sectors, as lots of people have been commenting, they're moving towards Web3. And lots of people also mentioned that art market is moving towards Web3. Do you think it's actually the case? Is art market moving in this trajectory? And also, what kind of challenges probably it's going to face if we're moving towards this direction?
I think, well, if I look at the market now, today versus maybe 12, 24 months ago, I think there are movements towards Web3. I don't think it's moving towards. I don't think it's like a kind of a mass, the whole crowd is just moving towards Web3. I think there are single pioneers out there that are out there exploring this space, and that's that's the way that all businesses, industries are working. Someone's going to take that step and that risk, and I think that is interesting because, in a sense, post I would say the kind of correction in the NFT market, you're starting to see some of these entities are coming and working with traditional artists as well as other artists, and I know you had Bernadine on this early in an early conversation. All these things, I think, are signs that we're going into a second sort of phase, a second cycle in this market, where you need translators, you need the pioneers that can sort of convince the few, and then hopefully the masses will come. I think the challenge generally in the art world is the same challenge as we had when we were looking at the evolution of the online market. I mean, it's been, online sales has been, if you're looking at Amazon, and this has been 25 years in the making, and the art world has really sort of, I would say, the last 10 years we're starting to see an adoption of online as a sort of a tool, but really only the last 3 years where as part of the pandemic, where we really saw a sort of a strong adoption. So I think the art world in general there's an embedded slightly sort of reluctance to change. I think this might be generational, and it maybe changes as new generation of younger art dealers, galleries, and other people in the stakeholders in the market comes in. But I think it's also slightly driven by the reasons why we're here. I mean, a lot of people in the art world never chose. I mean, sometimes I had to kind of, including myself. If it was for the money and to make profit, I would stay back in banking. And so we're looking for something else. We're looking for the kind of slight passion, something that is a business that we can enjoy, and hopefully build to something that is sustainable. But it's not always driven by making scalability and being big. I think that's maybe some of the businesses that you see in your space when you're looking at startups has that ambition. But I think a lot of people within the art world, if you took in the traditional art world, are there for other reasons. And therefore, it's often hard to argue why they should do all these things. Why embrace all these things? Because we want to have thousands of different audiences. That means a lot for a gallery to even thinking about the management of that. How are we going to deal with that? 1,000 new clients, well, of course, great, but we only have 5 artists and they only have 5 works, and there is a fulfillment thing. These are not traditional retail businesses. So I think we're also struggling a little bit with an industry which is not. Well, they're reluctant to change, but they're not reluctant because they don't want change. They're reluctant because they don't want, but more often from a personal point of view. I think there is. So that's a challenge. And then I think it's a challenge which is capital in terms of taking that step to do this. And I mean, most people are, as I said, unfamiliar even with the online e-commerce space. If we're starting to think now Web3, which if we kind of envisage the sort of next generation of infrastructure that we might use for the future, now that's almost too sci-fi for most people. So I think adoption, the slowness of adoption will take time. But you got to have those, as I said, the movement is, we see movement, and the movement has to happen because otherwise no one's going to go that direction. So we're at that early stage. I think just the businesses and people who are in this space needs to brace themselves for quite a long journey to kind of get people there. We will eventually happen. It took maybe 20 years in the online market to kind of get there properly. It might not take that long, but I think we need to almost think about this over a kind of a decade. How do we build this space over a decade? And then hopefully it's important though that we have these conversations and bring the art world along. I mean, sometimes we are sort of easy to kind of dismiss the art world because they don't listen. So let's forget them and let's do our own thing. Ultimately, the existing art world is the key holders to most of the things that happen in the art world still. They have the access to the artists, they have the access to the collectors. So simply just developing models that so everyone thinks is fancy without the adoption of the existing players, I think will lead us nowhere. So I think it's important that we maybe language-wise don't sort of alienate these, the art world and saying, hey, this is what you need to do, but a bit more humble about how we go about things. And there are resources, there's capital also, within the art world to be able to do these things. I think we just need to, it will take a bit of time, but it's the movement is happening. The move hasn't happened, but I think it will ultimately take place, like probably many other industries.
Thank you. When we meet a startup which claims themselves to be in Web3, we always ask them the question, so what was Web2? Yeah. And most of them, unfortunately, they do not have the answer. So they do not know their predecessors. And in our, at Feel Arts, we tend to think that if you want to be successful, let's say in Web3, you have to learn by heart the best examples of Web2 and then try to implement them. Then just to, let's say, arrive to the newborn market and try to find your market fit based on your solution, but not the demand. and all the demands have already found their solutions in Web 2. So that's our small tip. The final question towards you, I cannot not to mention the recent addition to the family of ArtTactic reports. I mean, the report on fractionalized art. So what's your personal take on art fractionalization?
Well, I think it's interesting, and we've been looking at the fractional ownership space for probably since 2010, 2011, 2009 actually, where this emerged in China in particular with all the exchanges. The concept of fractional ownership and the theoretical concept of it, I think it's great. I think it's interesting. I'm fascinated by it. I think it has aspect to it which I know a lot of people in the art world don't like it because it sort of dematerializes maybe some of the kind of more physical relationship that you typically have to art. But I think we can see fractional ownership not necessarily only as an investment tool, but it could also be a fundraising tool. It could be allowing people to not only give to artists and art from the sake of giving, but it could be also having and I guess retain ownership in something, which might give you an even more stronger association with why you give something. So I think the thing, maybe this cycle we see now, which is very much the sort of investment portfolio diversification model, I think hopefully will diversify away from that and actually looking at fractional ownership as a almost an extension of what we see now in the crowdfunding space, whether it's Kickstarter or Patreon and maybe the others, is that this can be used as a way to retain ownership in the future. It could be for young galleries that are cultivating young artists, and typically, when the artist might reach a certain stage, what happens? A bigger gallery maybe poach their artist, and then they lose everything. They've spent 5-6 years on building that career of the artist, and they got nothing left unless they had bought the work by the artist, and that becomes your kind of equity. Now, most galleries don't have the ability or capital to do that. They rather sell the work, obviously, and place the works. So when that happens, typically they're left with nothing, which they can then resell back into, or use that process to invest in the next generation. So if there was a way of using fractional ownership in sense of, where the galleries retained some ownership in works that was sold in some way or another, that might be then the future success of these artists could then be reinvested. So I think we're just at the cusp of exploring what fractional ownership could mean for the future. I think it's I think, as I said, as a model, as a concept, I think it's really interesting. I think it has, challenges when we just moving this into a purely financial space, because that obviously, when we talk about art as an investment and buying, fractions for the purpose of purely making money, that obviously kind of detracts maybe a little bit away from what other functions that art has. And I think that's suddenly we are isolating maybe the social and emotional aspect that we have with art and just purely making it financial. Well, then the motivations will be that we are looking for returns. If we don't see returns, then we will be unhappy. So I think you might sort of set yourself up to finding it difficult to fulfill those expectations if you are pitching this purely as a financial asset. So most people who you buy physical art, and yes, there is a value aspect to it, and they obviously would like to know that hopefully this will go up in value in the future. But I think the emotional and the social aspect around this is also very strong, which means that you have a more diversified portfolio motivations for why you're involved. So I think that's maybe something that is missing a little bit in the sort of first generation of fractional ownership, is that it feels very investment focused, and that's obviously there's an appetite for that, but that we will see where that will take us. And I hope that in a sense this is just a cycle of further innovation around fractional ownership as a concept to actually benefit much more stakeholders than investors, but also maybe other stakeholders in the market, being the artist or the agents or intermediaries and so forth.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Sonia, you wanted to add something?
No. Thank you so much for today, and thank you so much for being here with us today. We're honored to have a guest like you, and I think everyone who's been watching today had an amazing time and so many insights from today.
No, thank you, Sonia, Dennis, for inviting me. It's been a pleasure. And as I said, I'm very I'm keen on looking at your next report that's coming out. Following you going forward is really, I think you're occupying a fantastic space. Had I been 20 years younger, I wish I could have done exactly what you're doing now. But hopefully we all add something to the space in terms of making the art world, better, bigger, more, more of everything, but in a sort of in a morally and ethically good way.
Thank you, Anders, for the fantastic job you and ArtTactic, led by you, are doing. So, and thanks for sharing your information with our listeners and viewers. So staying tuned and subscribing to the best reports of ArtTactic.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.